CNN.
Happening now, breaking news, Oval Office obstruction as President Trump launches a new Twitter rant tonight about the Russia investigation. We're learning more about the special counsel's focus and what it could mean for the commander-in-chief. Witch hunt. The president appears to be going after Robert Mueller personally, blasting leaders of the Russia probe as, quote, very bad and conflicted people. Is Mr. Trump still toying with the idea of firing the special counsel? In some trouble. That's Mr. Trump's assessment of Congressman Steve Scalise's condition, the Republican undergoing a third surgery hours after he and other lawmakers were targeted in a shooting rampage. This hour, we have new video and new information on the investigation. And Field of Unity, we're standing by for the first pitch as members of Congress play ball, both parties, making a statement about bipartisanship, refusing to let a deranged gunman call off their big game. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news this hour, President Trump back on Twitter tonight, blasting talk of obstruction. And Vice President Mike Pence now also hiring an outside attorney as the special counsel's investigation widens and threatens to reach the Oval Office. The Washington Post is reporting that Mueller is investigating the president for possible obstruction of justice. CNN has learned that Mueller's team soon will interview senior intelligence officials about their conversations with the president and his alleged efforts to get the FBI to stop investigating former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. One of those officials, the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, was questioned by the Senate Intelligence Committee in closed session today. Coats and the National Security Agency Director, Admiral Mike Rogers, refused to answer any key questions during a public hearing last week. Also breaking. We're standing by for an unusual show of bipartisan unity as members of Congress compete in their annual charity baseball game despite yesterday's shooting attack on Republicans during their practice. House Republican Whip Steve Scalise still in critical condition, undergoing a third surgery after being seriously wounded. I'll talk about those stories and more with Senator Richard Blumenthal. He's a Democrat on the Judiciary Committee that's also expanding its Russia investigation. And our correspondents and specialists are also standing by. First, let's go to our justice correspondent, Jessica Schneider. Jessica, as the president vents on Twitter once again tonight, the special counsel is ramping up his investigation.
That's right, Wolf. We know investigators for special counsel Robert Mueller will soon talk to several key intelligence officials. That marks the clearest sign yet that Mueller may be investigating potential obstruction of justice by the president. Tonight, CNN has learned 3 top intelligence officials, including one who left the government this spring, will be investigated and interviewed by special counsel Robert Mueller's team as early as next week. Law enforcement sources tell CNN the interviews are part of an effort by Mueller to determine if there's enough evidence to launch a full-scale probe into whether the president obstructed justice by seeking to end the Russia investigation and by firing FBI Director James Comey. The interviews with National Security Advisor Mike Rogers and Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats are the strongest and most public indication yet that Mueller is moving to expand his investigation into the Oval Office and come on the heels of contentious testimony by Coats and Rogers before the Senate Intelligence Committee last week, in which they denied being pressured by President Trump to help end the Russia investigation.
I do not recall ever feeling pressured to do so.
I have never felt pressure to intervene or interfere in any way, shaping intelligence in a political way, or in relationship to an ongoing investigation.
While both men issued broad denials, Vice Chairman Mark Warner alluded to a witness who might testify differently.
We have facts that there were other individuals that were aware of the call that was made to you, aware of the substance of that call, and that there was a memo prepared because of concerns about that.
CNN has learned that witness is former NSA Deputy Richard Leggett. Sources say he wrote a memo documenting a conversation in which the president allegedly urged Admiral Rogers to ask the FBI to lift the cloud of the Russia investigation.
No collusion, no obstruction,
He's a leaker.
Despite his denials, questions of obstruction have loomed over President Trump since his firing of FBI Director Comey May 9th. The next day, he reportedly told Russia's foreign minister inside the Oval Office that firing Comey had relieved, quote, great pressure on him. And he admitted to NBC that he fired Comey in part because of the Russia investigation.
In fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
Tonight, as Mueller's investigation heats up, Congress is expanding its own inquiries. The chair and vice chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee now say they will begin looking into Comey's firing and, quote, improper interference in FBI investigations. And today, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee met with Coates behind closed doors.
What do you guys want? What do you want?
Republican Senator Marco Rubio told CNN today the president should let the investigation take its course.
I think the president would be best served by having this thing fully looked at so that there's no doubts at the end. He should be very comfortable with that.
And the leaders of the Senate Intelligence Committee who met with DNI Coates today said they cleared up a number of questions that remained from his testimony last week, but would not say whether Coates invoked executive privilege or might do so in the future. Meanwhile, CNN sued in federal court today to get the FBI to turn over those memos from former FBI Director James Comey.
Yeah, those memos are unclassified, and CNN sued under the Freedom of Information Act. Jessica Schneider, thank you very much. And now the president on the attack once again as the White House dodges questions about the special counsel investigation. Let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny. Jeff, the president lashing out at the report that he's under investigation for possible obstruction of justice.
He is indeed, Wolf, from morning until afternoon, lashing out on social media as he often does. But the White House has enacted a policy of not talking about this Russia investigation at all. In fact, during the daily briefing today, which was not held on camera, held off camera, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House spokeswoman, declined 8 times to talk about this. That didn't stop the president, though, at all. Let's take a look at some of what he's saying on social media. He said this early this morning. He said this afternoon, excuse me, going after Hillary Clinton. Why is it that Hillary Clinton's family and Dems' dealings with Russia are not looked at, but my non-dealings are? That came only a couple hours after he said this. You're witnessing the single greatest witch hunt in American political history, led by some very bad and conflicted people. So unclear in that email, in that social media message, if he's talking about the special counselor, Robert Mueller, or some of the investigators that have been criticized by some Republicans there. Wolf clearly showing his frustration with this widening investigation here. And many people inside the building here, Wolf, and many Republicans indeed on Capitol Hill, simply wish the president would stop weighing in on all of this, wish that they would wall this off and talk about issues. But he is simply not following that instruction. Now, separately, Wolf, we are learning tonight that the vice president has retained his own lawyer as well, his personal lawyer here, to deal with this special counsel investigation and the congressional committees. He's hired Richard Cullen. He's a former Virginia attorney general, a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia in the George H.W. Bush administration, a very respected lawyer. But we got a statement from the vice president's communications director, Wolf. It says this. That the vice president is focused entirely on his duties and promoting the president's agenda and looks forward to a swift conclusion of this matter. Unlikely that this will be swift at all, Wolf, because the vice president, of course, also has many links to this Russia investigation, particularly, if you'll remember, because of Michael Flynn, the fired national security advisor who misled the vice president about his contacts with the Russian ambassador here. So the vice president hiring his own lawyer here, his office saying that he is not using taxpayer funds for this. He'll pay for it himself or potentially out of a political action committee. In fact, he's going to Indianapolis tomorrow to raise money for that. But Wolf, a sign here that the vice president hiring his own lawyer, another sign this investigation widening and has no end in sight.
Yeah, it certainly is. The president, the vice president, a whole bunch of Trump associates, they all have retained private outside attorneys. Jeff Zeleny, thank you for that report. Let's get some more on all of this. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, a member of the Judiciary Committee, is with us. So you've seen the tweets. Is this a witch hunt?
Very far from a witch hunt. In fact, calling it a witch hunt and these continuing tweets are almost themselves a continuing course of obstruction because they are transparently an attempt to put pressure on the special prosecutor and the FBI to abandon a lawful investigation that's based on some very, very clear facts. The firing of Comey, the acknowledgement, indeed almost bragging about it afterward to the Russians, as well as on the NBC interview, that it was because of the Russian thing, create a prima facie case, a case to go forward with this investigation.
It's not unusual, though, for someone who's being investigated to criticize the special counsel or the independent counsel. Remember, Bill Clinton, he used to criticize the independent counsel, Ken Starr, and his investigations, whether Whitewater or Monica Lewinsky, all of the time.
And criticism is fair and not unprecedented, but has to be seen in the context of the demand for loyalty from Comey, the plea to Comey that he go light on Flynn, and the other statements that were made afterward as the investigation is unfolding now. So I think it is evidence. It's not conclusive evidence, but it's more evidence, a thickening cloud of evidence over this administration that I think will be difficult to deny in the long run.
The chairman of your committee, the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, says the committee will pursue investigations into any efforts to influence FBI investigations. Do you consider that an investigation into possible obstruction of justice?
It is very definitely an investigation into possible
Why won't he
obstruction.
say that specifically?
Because the chairman, and we all are concerned, and we've expressed that concern to him, that the integrity of the Department of Justice is directly threatened by this potential obstruction of justice. And there is a question here of intent as to what the purpose was. But again, the acknowledgement that it was the Russia thing, that he wanted it to stop because he was concerned about the potential collusion case against him. And here is the other part of it, Wolf, that I think is very important, and sort of the elephant in the room: conspiracy. No accident that the vice president has hired his own lawyer. Others in the administration will do so very, very shortly if they hadn't done so already. And the president's counsel already is interviewing those White House aides and employees who may have had conversations with the president. So what we're seeing here is a widening investigation, not only as to statements made by the president, but also others who behind the scenes may have heard of Mason.
You're a longtime prosecutor. You were the attorney general of your home state of Connecticut. When you say conspiracy, what does that mean? Conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice? Is that what you're saying?
Conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, or conspiracy to collude with the Russians in interfering with our investigation. There are two separate points of interest here, and the conspiracy may well involve statements made by the president or others in furtherance of any illegal goal, such as shutting down the investigation.
And the fact that he is going after this investigation with these tweets, you've seen these tweets today, they're pretty tough. His lawyers probably are not very happy about that.
His lawyers have got to be very unhappy if they have any sense of what the reaction will be here. And knowing Special Prosecutor Mueller and the FBI, I think they will put aside whatever emotional reaction they may have to these tweets, but it certainly will not discourage them in any way. And they do constitute evidence of a state of mind.
It's interesting. We just got a letter from Dianne Feinstein, who's the ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. Let me read to you from that letter. This is a letter that involves James Comey's so far refusal to testify before the Judiciary Committee. Second, she says, we unanimously believe that Director Comey should testify before our committee regarding serious concerns that have been raised about political interference with FBI investigations and possible obstruction of justice. These issues are squarely within the committee's jurisdiction. I am disappointed that Mr. Comey declined our initial request, and hope he will reconsider. If not, the committee should take steps to compel his attendance. Be assured, my Democratic colleagues are supportive of issuing a subpoena should it become necessary. I assume you're part of those Democratic colleagues.
We had a meeting as recently as yesterday, late afternoon, early evening, and we are united that there should be subpoenas to former Director Comey, as well as to the current Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and very likely to Rod Rosenstein, because they all have knowledge. And Rod Rosenstein may be a witness here, so he will have to recuse himself from any consideration of firing Bob Mueller, as unlikely as I hope that might be. But certainly there will be subpoenas.
There will only be subpoenas, Senator, if the Republican majority, the chairman, for example, Chuck Grassley, the chairman of your committee, wants there to be subpoenas.
And my belief is, and I can't speak for the chairman, that we will be united as a committee in seeking information about the Department of Justice investigation insofar as its integrity and independence may be threatened by an obstruction of justice. And that's really the goal here.
Senator Blumenthal, stand by. There's more information coming in. We need to take a quick break. We'll resume our coverage right after this. We're back with Senator Richard Blumenthal. We're talking about the special counsel's Russia investigation. Serious questions about whether President Trump tried to obstruct justice. Senator, I need you to stand by because right now we're going to be getting an update on the investigation into the shooting rampage targeting Republican lawmakers during their baseball practice yesterday morning. Let's go to CNN's Diane Gallagher. Diane, what more are you learning tonight?
Wolf, the wife of the shooter, speaking out today, saying that before he left Illinois, he made preparations. He sold off almost everything he owned. He got rid of his businesses. Wolf, we are also getting surveillance video that shows an angle we haven't seen before. You can see it's still pretty much under investigation out here. Agents around the area. It is an intense scene.
Surveillance video just obtained by CNN from a coffee shop across the street from the ballpark captures the shooting from another vantage point, a window being blown out, people running and police arriving on scene amid gunfire. This cell phone video shows House Majority Whip Steve Scalise laying in the infield. Scalise was shot in the hip and is suffering from bone fractures and injuries to his internal organs. Remains in critical condition. Had 3 surgeries and could require more. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump visited Scalise in the hospital last night.
He's in some trouble. He's a great fighter, and he's going to be okay, we hope.
Trump also visited with Capitol Police Officer Crystal Griner, who was shot in the ankle. Another officer, David Bailey, who was injured but not shot, was treated and released Wednesday. Dyson Foods lobbyist Matt Michael was shot several times in the chest and needs help breathing. He will need more surgeries, but can communicate through notes. And Congressman Roger Williams, briefly hospitalized for an injury to his leg, was back on Capitol Hill today with his staffer, Zach Barth, shot in the leg.
There was nowhere for me to go. There was no gate, nothing like that. So I made myself the smallest target possible, laid on the ground. And then I saw him turn his gun towards me. He started firing. Everything around me started to pop. Felt a sharp burning pain in my leg, looked down, I'd been hit. And at that point, adrenaline was pumping through. And my fight or flight reflexes took over. Meantime,
the investigation into shooter James Hodgkinson continues. Today, FBI agents are combing the field for clues. So far, they found 2 weapons, a 9mm handgun and a 7.62 caliber rifle, which the ATF says appear to be legally purchased. The FBI is examining a cell phone, computer, and camera found in the white cargo van where Hodgkinson lived since March. Hodgkinson left behind a long public trail of angry social media activity directed at the Republican Party and President Trump. Authorities want to know why the 66-year-old from Illinois with a checkered criminal history was in Alexandria. He was often seen sitting on a park bench near the baseball field, and he joined a nearby YMCA on April 4th. But while he canceled his membership the day before the shooting, his dues were paid through July. Checked in there at 5:31 on the morning of the shooting.
And we are getting an update from the hospital on lobbyist Matt Micah. We're told that his condition has improved. Wolf, he is now in serious condition. Also, we are just learning from a source that Majority Whip Scalise is out of that 3rd surgery, but he does remain in critical condition. Wolf?
Let's hope for both of them. We're praying certainly for both of them, all of the victims. Diane Gallagher in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of Washington. Thanks very much as we stand by for the congressional baseball game over at Nationals Park. Despite the shooting, be sure to stay with CNN for an unprecedented joint interview with the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. By the way, that's coming up in our next hour only here on CNN. I want to get back to Senator Richard Blumenthal. What needs to be done to calm things down? Because the political rhetoric, as you know, has been very vicious.
One of the silver lines in this cloud the horrible, horrific attack that we saw just about 24 hours ago is that there is a greater sense of common purpose and unity, and there was more than maybe the public realized. But I think that there is a greater sense of community, and I think we need to seize this moment and tone down the rhetoric. I know that's easier said than done, and part of the problem is that the president is continuing the very visceral and vehement attacks instead of saying, as my colleague Senator Rubio said, that he welcomes a swift result and a fair result to this investigation.
And we're going to see a very positive note. We're looking at live pictures right now, Senator, from Nationals Park, where the Washington Nationals play. But tonight, the Democratic lawmakers will play the Republican lawmakers. This will be an emotional moment, especially, of course, after what happened yesterday morning.
It will be an emotional moment. And for example, in the Senate today, we had a bipartisan lunch that brought us together. And I think there is a sense in the Senate, and I think in the House as well, that we need more common purpose, less partisanship, less partisan bickering and divisions, and a focus on policy, because we're going to have disagreements on policy, on healthcare, tax reform, and infrastructure, but we can get results if we simply build on that common purpose.
You see one sign that says Scalise Strong out there in the stands. This is, it's so sad to think that the majority whip, the number 3 Republican in the House, he's now in critical condition at the MedStar Washington Hospital Center, just gone through 3 surgeries, and he may need more. And we always have to ask the question, why?
And our hearts go out to him, our hearts and prayers together. I think we've all said it numerous times over the last 24 hours.
We hope he does make a full and speedy recovery.
Well,
all
he
of
is
the
a fighter.
victims. Yeah.
He's a fighter, and he's tough. And
he's a very good man.
Good man.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. Thanks for coming in. Just ahead, President Trump lashes out as the special counsel Robert Mueller weighs a wider probe into allegations the president may have obstructed justice. And a day after a gunman opened fire on a Republican baseball practice, badly wounding a U.S. congressman, Republican and Democratic lawmakers, once again, they're getting ready for their charity game at Nationals Park. We're waiting for the first pitch. Stay with us.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
We're back with Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He's a member of the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees. We're following the breaking news. President Trump taking to Twitter late this afternoon to complain once again about reports he's under investigation by the special counsel Robert Mueller for possible obstruction of justice. As you know, Senator, the Washington Post is also reporting that investigators have been looking for any evidence of possible financial crimes among Trump associates. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. Wolf, that was a striking piece of the Washington Post story that I don't think has been widely covered. My hunch is that the financial crimes they might be investigating would relate to Russian money. There are reports that a significant number of Trump's development projects have involved investments or financing from Russians or from Russian banks. That would be my hunch as to how it would possibly be connected to an investigation that's also looking into Russian interference in our 2016 election and the possibility of complicated relationships between Trump's inner circle of advisors and business partners and Russia and the Russian regime. There is no more detail in the Washington Post story, and it's not yet clear exactly what sorts of financial transactions might be under investigation or under scrutiny, but it would seem common sense to me that the intersection between Russian investment and Trump's complex and still yet undisclosed business holdings would be a likely target of that consideration.
So there's a lot that you guys need to investigate right now. Does it seem like it's exploding right now? What's the status of this investigation?
Well, I'm encouraged that we continue to have strong work being done by the Senate Intelligence Committee. I believe the Senate Judiciary Committee is going to re-engage and will investigate further. We've also seen action in a subcommittee of appropriations and on foreign relations. So I'm encouraged that you've got Republicans and Democrats working together across a range of issues and that there is broad support for Bob Mueller as special counsel. So I think this is going to continue to move forward. There's a great deal of smoke There is not yet clearly fire, but the fact that the president has gone back onto Twitter and is now dedicating his time to trying to distract the American people or to denigrate this investigation is really not wise. Any criminal defense counsel's first piece of advice is to shut up to folks that they represent. And so I'm sure that President Trump's personal lawyer is probably frustrated at the frequency with which he's taking to Twitter to express his views on this ongoing investigation.
Senator Coons, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
All right, let's bring in our political and national security specialist, and Chris Cillizza, talking about those tweets. There are at least 4 tweets today on these issues. Let me read one of them once again. They made up a phony collusion with the Russians story, found 0 proof, so now they go for obstruction of justice on the phony story. Nice. Do you believe the president does understand the seriousness, potential gravity of this investigation?
No. Because I think he has one frame, one lens through which he sees everything, Wolf, which is basically the lesson he learned in New York tabloid back and forth media politics, which is, this is a story, I knock it down, I put my version of the story out, I declare victory, and I move on. It worked for him for a long time. He was good at it, frankly. But this is not that. This is a special counsel. This is now, according to the Washington Post, an investigation that involves obstruction of justice, not of a Trump aide, not of a Trump ally, not of a Trump former staffer, but of Donald Trump. I don't think he has a gear that isn't the one gear he always puts things in, often expressed via Twitter. So no, I don't think he understands the seriousness of it. Yes, I am certain people have tried to emphasize the seriousness of it to him. And one other quick note on that tweet you showed. Number I thought was interesting. There are 80,000 likes essentially for that tweet, because there's a group of people. Now he has tens of millions of Twitter followers, but there's a group of people who will support anything he says or does. The problem for Donald Trump is those people aren't Bob Mueller or the investigators.
Yeah, and there, just a little while ago, Gloria, 2 more tweets. I'll put them up on the screen. Why is it that Hillary Clinton's family and Dems dealing with Russia are not looked at, but my non-dealings are? And Crooked H, referring to Hillary Clinton, destroyed phones with hammer, bleached emails, and had husband meet with AG days before she was cleared. And they talk about obstruction. So he's going backwards in history right now, going after Hillary Clinton.
And you know, that last point is on talking points that were distributed to surrogates for Donald Trump, which of course talks about the Hillary Clinton team and the destruction of emails, and talks about this double standard here that he wants. I do believe he understands the seriousness of this. I do believe that's why he's tweeting nonstop about it. I think what he also understands is that he can't control it. And that's what's driving him, you know, crazy. We can debate whether he understands the seriousness. I would think he does. I would think his lawyers have told him.
He certainly should, Gloria. You're right.
But I think that the problem for him is that this is totally now out of his control. He believes if Jeff Sessions were there, he might have been able to control it to a certain degree, because maybe Jeff Sessions would have prevented the appointment of a special counsel. But now there is nothing he can do about this short of firing Mueller. And the firing of Mueller, everyone has told him, would not be good for him. But you can, in these tweets, you can see his sense of frustration and anger here over this.
It certainly is.
Well, just very quickly on those tweets, just a quick fact check. Number one, there's no evidence that's come up that Hillary Clinton directed Bill Clinton to get on the plane for Loretta Lynch. My guess is Hillary Clinton was super annoyed that he did that. He should not have done it, clearly. Number two, the phones were smashed. That was in the FBI report on their findings of the investigation, but it was done by staff, not by Hillary Clinton, and following protocols. Like, again, broad strokes are not wrong, but those specifics are just not totally accurate.
A fair point. He also, Mike Rogers, and you once worked at the FBI, he called this investigation by the FBI, they're the lead investigators right now, a witch hunt led by, quote, very bad people. What message does that send to the men and women of the FBI?
Well, not a good one, for a whole host of reasons. First of all, these are the men and women who are defending us against terrorist attacks, and they're going after spies, and they're also putting criminals in jail and gangsters and everyone in between. And this personal attack between the president and really anyone, Hillary Clinton, the FBI in a broader sense, to me is so unpresidential. If he wanted to learn how to control this, he uses the power of the presidency to do big things and have big sets of conversation with the American people well beyond what he thinks of Hillary Clinton or what he thinks of the FBI agents doing the investigation. Very harmful. And the reason we talk about this every day is President Donald Trump.
Exactly
he cannot leave it alone. He would be so much better off to take Chris Coons' advice and shut up.
You know, Bianna, as someone who's covered Washington now for a long time, the last thing a politician should want to do is irritate the men and women of the law enforcement community, the FBI, for example, or the intelligence community like the CIA. You don't want to irritate them.
Well, nobody wants to, unless obviously it's Donald Trump and the President of the United States. I mean, you have somebody like Bob Mueller who's received accolades and praise from both sides of the aisle, and yet the President attacks him via Twitter as well. The past couple of weeks, every major newspaper has been publishing stories about those surrounding the President, urging him not to fire him, and it's just turned into a game of will he or won't he? And the President ultimately, and we always conclude with this point, but it's so important to make, is his own worst enemy. He's the one putting these tweets out. He's the one who's making his attorneys sweat and work that much harder. And he's the only one talking about Hillary Clinton right now. No one else is.
You know, Wolf, he's always been his own spokesman. Even when he masqueraded as John Miller or John Barron, he was his spokesman. And what these tweets do are, I'm speaking for myself. The problem is, as Mike points out, he needs to change the subject back to his agenda, because that's what can get him out of this, you know, and they need to kind of separate the White House and have the damage control team and the agenda people, and the president needs to be with the agenda people.
And they're trying to do that, to Gloria's point. They have said, we're referring everything to Mark Kasowitz. When you ask the
Who's not
president,
speaking?
He's not speaking. And guess who is speaking?
Yeah, just quickly.
Donald Trump. That's always the problem. He gets in the way of their
And
attempts
just
to
real
split.
quickly, an investigation is not guilty.
Right.
It doesn't mean he's guilty. They could go through this investigation and come out and say, you know what, we found nothing.
obstruction.
And I argue, if Mr. President, if you passionately believe you've done nothing wrong, then stop talking about it.
Yeah, very quickly.
And he's hurting the people that have been most loyal to him. Right now, case in point, the story about the vice president hiring outside counsel, a defense attorney, a noted criminal defense attorney. This vice president has stuck his neck out defending the president, has been burned twice when it came to the Russia investigation, and now clearly is trying to distance himself from the president of the United States.
Yeah, it's not cheap to hire a former U.S. attorney who's now in private practice either. That's the new attorney, the private outside attorney for Vice President Mike Pence. Everybody stay with us. There's a lot more coming up. We'll be right back.
Smarter. This is TrueCar.
We're back with our political and national security specialists. Bianna, very interesting. The Russian President Putin today actually spoke at this event that he had about the FBI director, James Comey. Listen to this.
What makes the FBI director different from Mr. Snowden, then? It seems to me that in this case, he's not so much the head of the FBI as an activist with his own particular point of view. By the way, if he faces some sort of prosecution for this, we're prepared to give him political asylum too. He should know that.
I guess he's got a political sense of humor as well. But on a serious note, you had a chance to speak today with the retired Admiral William McRaven, who led the bin Laden raid. What were his thoughts about how Russia is dealing with all of this right now?
Well, I asked him if Russia was laughing at us, and he said, I mean, given this clip you just saw, that's classic Putin trolling. And I would argue that it was emboldened by what he saw play out in Washington the day after he fired the FBI director, to have his foreign minister and ambassador be told that the president had a huge burden lifted off his shoulders because he fired a nut job. The admiral said that he thought that Russians were in fact giggling at us because they look for every opportunity on the global stage to be a power force player, and they got that opportunity in large part in the Middle East, and obviously in our election here at home, and other elections throughout the Western world.
You know, it's interesting, Mike Rogers, if Putin thought that the President Trump and his administration were going to ease sanctions against Russia, they got a rude awakening today when the Senate overwhelmingly passed a bill overwhelmingly that not only keeps the sanctions, but says if the administration wants to ease some of those sanctions, Congress has the authority to review it first.
Yeah, I'm not even sure they're giggling. I think they're drinking vodka by the gallon over there, celebrating how effective an information operation was conducted against the United States of America. If they had gotten the sanctions relief, my God, he probably would have fell over dead, Putin himself, right? I think that would have been the brass ring. But what they did do is cause massive disruption, and it's still ongoing. So they're going to go back and put this in their playbooks. And what else it does is it gives them stature in other places in the world, especially developing nations, that the Russian intelligence services can punch way above their weight. It makes them, they'll recruit better. They're using this, the way that we're playing it out in America. They're going to use this to recruit people all over the world to continue to do what they do. It's like I said, I'm not sure there's any giggling. I think there's a little,
what's amazing is that the only one who really seems to still have doubts about Russian meddling in the election is the president of the United States. Mike, how do you explain that?
I don't know. I think all of the intelligence services, well, not all of them, but the ones that would make these determinations have come out and said, yes, they've determined it. Both Republicans and Democrats have said, yes, they've tried to do it. I think where the president makes his mistake is that when they say that, he believes that that means that he didn't win the election. And that's his mistake. He did win the election. I don't think there's anyone that disputes that. The Russians didn't change votes. But what they did do is cause some disruption and the lack of trust in the electorate.
Right.
That's the biggest problem that we have. So he would be good to come out and say, yeah, I won, and I won because I was right on all my issues. Oh, by the way, we're going to make sure the Russians never do this again. He would be well ahead of the game.
You know, the most stunning part of the Comey testimony to me was when he was asked the question, to your point, about whether the president had really been interested and asked multiple questions about Russian hacking into American democracy. His answer was no. That the president's lack of interest was stunning, and what he was interested in was self-interest. Was, what about me? No collusion? Am I clear? And all the rest. But as far as the country is concerned, no.
It didn't seem like the Attorney General. Hold on one second, Chris. The Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, he didn't seem very interested in that either.
I was just going to add, we know that Jeff Sessions from, I believe in his recollection, from February 9th, the day after he became the Attorney General, all the way until he officially recused himself, hadn't asked any questions about it. I mean, that's the issue. Gloria, I think, nails it. Why was Donald Trump so interested in finding out from James Comey the assurance that he was not being investigated, when, in fact, what we are dealing with, if you take one big step back here to the congressman's point, is a foreign power had a meddling operation of considerable success. No, didn't alter the results of the election, but considerable success. That can be walled off. They are mutually exclusive. Yes, Donald Trump can have won, and yes, Russia could have hacked the election, and we need to address that.
Deanna, go ahead.
Well, there were reports today that the Attorney General may have lied once again in his testimony if this report is actually factual. And the report states that the Attorney General may have met with a powerful and a known Russian lobbyist for dinners over the past year. Obviously, that wasn't disclosed in what we heard from the testimony from the Attorney General. But once again, just to highlight what Gloria had said, the Attorney General seemed to say so nonchalantly that no, he hadn't been briefed by intelligence officials on Russia's investigation, or an investigation into Russia's meddling in the U.S. election, the number one crisis facing the country, and he seemed to shrug it off along with the president.
Yeah, we've seen that report. I think it was in The Guardian. We haven't confirmed it independently here at CNN, but we're looking into it. Obviously, could be very, very significant. You agree?
Well, let me play devil's advocate for 1 minute. I can see where the President of the United States, if they're feeling that he is under federal investigation, and it's public, and all the dogs are out to get him, and he knows, because he's been told by the FBI director, that he was not under investigation. I can understand that frustration. As a former FBI agent, when you have the Attorney General's office and a team, a legion of FBI agents causing trouble for you every single day, you can't imagine the stress that puts you under. So I get that piece of it. And I would think from the Attorney General, who I know personally, I think that he is just shocked and dismayed that someone would even suggest that he has done something that isn't completely patriotic and loyal to the United States. And so I think that we're looking at it a little differently. Everybody wants to find the one thing he didn't get right. I'm telling you, I know in person, I would be shocked.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that the investigation shouldn't make that determination, but I can almost understand their frustration and how they make a decision that under this much scrutiny wouldn't look right to us, but to them it felt pretty normal.
That part of his testimony was very compelling, I would have to say.
Yeah.
Very quickly, Bianca, go ahead.
I just got to say that I'm still struck by the fact that the Russians seem to be so forgettable this past year in this election cycle. And that's the one thing that seems to be the constant out of all foreigners, that it seems to be the Russians that this administration has somehow forgotten that they met with.
Everybody stay with us. I want to give an important programming note to our viewers for an unprecedented joint interview with the House Speaker Paul Ryan and Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. That's coming up later today on Aaron Burnett Out Front during the 7 p.m. Eastern hour right here on CNN. Meanwhile, there are multiple stories breaking right now. Just a little while ago, doctors gave their first update on the condition of Otto Warmbier, the 22-year-old college student held for 17 months by North Korea and returned to the United States Tuesday in a comatose state.
His neurological condition can be best described as a state of unresponsive wakefulness. He has spontaneous eye opening and blinking. However, he shows no signs of understanding language, responding to verbal commands, or awareness of his surroundings. He has not spoken. This pattern of brain injury, however, is usually seen as a result of cardiopulmonary arrest, where the blood supply to the brain is inadequate for a period of time, resulting in the death of brain tissue.
Dr. Sanjay Gupta, our chief medical correspondent, is with us. He's also a neurosurgeon. Sanjay, as you just heard, extensive brain damage, shows no current signs of botulism. So what do you think could have happened?
Well, when you talk about the degree of brain damage that he had, and it's tough to talk about, but it was sort of involving all of his brain, that really indicates that something caused a lack of oxygenated blood to the brain. And usually in someone who's this young, he's 22 years old, it's usually more likely to be a respiratory arrest. So for some reason he wasn't breathing, and he wasn't getting enough oxygen into his body. Eventually that caused his heart to probably not pump enough blood to his brain, and that's what caused the sort of cell death in his brain. So that seems to be what happened, but what exactly caused him to stop breathing in the first place, to cause that respiratory arrest? We don't know. They were pretty certain. They were asked about botulism, pretty certain this wasn't botulism that caused this in some way. There was no evidence of that, even more than a year later. So, but they just don't know. Was it some other toxin? Was it an injury to the brain that then caused him to stop breathing? They simply don't know at this point.
How much more difficult is it for the doctors to properly ascertain the full extent of his situation, given that he was in North Korea for so long?
Well, it's challenging. One thing they said, Wolf, that I think is very important, again, sad, but in April of last year, April of 2016, he had an MRI scan that was provided from North Korea when he arrived in Cincinnati. And at that time, there was evidence of extensive damage to the brain. And that at that point, it appeared that it happened just within the previous few weeks, so probably in March at some point. But that was 14 months ago. So what you can say is how he's doing now. You can examine him. They can do all the testing. They get a very good idea of what he's doing now. But exactly what happened in March/April of last year is very hard to tell with the information they have. The state of wakeful unresponsiveness that you hear, they used to call that sort of thing a persistent vegetative state. They don't use that terminology now. Then that's where this definition or this description of wakeful unresponsiveness. You could be blinking, you could be looking around, might even be moving, but nothing is purposeful and you're not speaking.
What a sad story indeed. All right, Sanjay, thank you very, very much. We'll have much more on the breaking news right after this.